Okay, welcome everybody. The numbers are just growing all the time, so that's good. Welcome to this. This is the second webinar we've held, one last year. And it's a raptor group seminar, the BirdLife Australia raptor group. And I'm hosting this from Canberra, so I'd like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people, the traditional custodians of land, and we're meeting on and recognise all other people and families with connections with land in ACT and region. Sorry, I don't know how to expand that to cover everybody, but perhaps you can add your own pieces as you go. I'll introduce this evening's talk and then let Flossy tell us all about it. So Flossy Sperring, she studied in the Norfolk Island Morepork for her PhD, and following up on that, she's now a research fellow at Western Sydney University, studying the Christmas Island goshawk and hawk owl. So that's 3 island endemic species. That's quite a challenge. While chatting to Flossy earlier, I learned that struggling to catch moreporks in Norfolk Island was not her favourite experience. And that sounds like a typical PhD project to me, trying to catch a sample. And giving them names to a sample was the best part. And her favourite was Houdini. She tried to give them all owl puns. And that was her favourite name, but her least favourite owl. It was her favourite name, but her least favourite owl because he kept bouncing off the net before she finally caught him. Some of the other names she had was Alfreda Alfonso, Olivia Newton-John, and Kamala Harris. So that gives you an idea of the period of her work. The blurb of the talk, again, we asked for based on that, and it states that Flossy's studies have focused on the bird's diet, habitat, genetic diversity, the overall population health of these birds, with the aim to help identify what ecological characteristics might help their conservation. Right, well, I'm not going to ramble on. I'm sure Flossy will know the answers. I'm sure there are lots of highs and lows in the projects. So I'll just sit back and listen, and I'll hand over to Flossy. Over to you, Flossy.
Thanks, Stuart. And hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Nice to see a few familiar names. Yes, while I get sharing my screen, I would just like to acknowledge the Bunurong people, who are the traditional owners of the land where I work when I'm at home, not in the field. And yeah, pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So getting into it, yes, Stuart mentioned I've worked on the Christmas Island. I'm working on the Christmas Island goshawk and hawk owl, and I've worked on the Norfolk Island Morepork. I'm going to start by giving you a brief, or maybe not so brief, summary of my work for my PhD on Norfolk Island. And then we'll move into the Christmas Island stuff, which is still really early days. I'm only 6 months into my role, but I'll talk to you about what's sort of already known and what we're trying to achieve, and some sort of early goals that we've kicked already. So I'm going to assume you can all see my screen because we tested it before and this is what it looked like. So I think we're working. So this is the beautiful Norfolk Island Morepork. Super cute little species, not doing too well. There's about 25 to 35 of them left on Norfolk Island at the moment. And that's after some pretty intensive fieldwork and studies across the island. So we're pretty confident in that estimate. And yeah, that's pretty small, as you would imagine. If you're not familiar, this is where Norfolk Island is, so it's very isolated. There are not a lot of opportunities for gene flow for the Norfolk Island Morepork. A little bit of history. So back in 1986, there was actually only one Norfolk Island Morepork left. Her name was Miyamiti, and they say her lonely call could be heard across the island each night. And researchers, including Penny Olsen, went out there and realised that, yep, there's only one and we're going to have to do something about this. So they introduced 2 New Zealand moreporks onto the island in 1987, 2 males. Miyamiti bred with one of them. The other one disappeared and did not contribute any genetic material into the current population. So the whole population that exists on Norfolk Island is derived from these two individuals. And amazingly, Mark Hallam was on, who was working with the park staff. He got his camera out in 1989 and took this footage of those chicks, the very first two chicks from that pair, who went on to produce only 4 chicks together over 2 breeding seasons. So that management intervention happened just at the right time to save the Norfolk Island Morepork, which was pretty special. But then, as you might expect, if you know a little bit of something about genetic rescue or inbreeding, because the Amiti and Tintola, the male's name, only produced 4 offspring together, there was substantial inbreeding that went on. We had siblings breeding with each other, and then they kind of contributed to the rapid population growth that happened quite early on. But when you sort of look at all of the banding data, and this is just the pairs where we knew both the male and the female, only a handful of pairs actually contributed to that sort of population growth that we saw, which is a little bit concerning. And then after that, between 2008 and 2018, over 11 breeding seasons, there was only 1 successful breeding attempt that was observed, which is not very many. So that was why they were quite concerned and initiated my PhD project. And then over the next 6 breeding seasons between 2019 and 2025, I found 7 pairs across the island, but only one of those pairs was able to breed. And that pair only had 5 chicks over that period of time. So not looking great. So to try and understand, I mean, you can kind of, genetic stuff's not looking great, but we also wanted to understand things about the ecology and make sure there's not any other things that we need to be worrying about and what management interventions we could be putting in place. So I looked at the habitat suitability across the island. I GPS tracked 9 individuals during the breeding season, and these are their territories on a map of Norfolk Island, each colour representing a different owl. I'm not going to go into like all of the specific methods that I went into for my PhD, but if anyone has any questions about it, please come and ask me or send me an email at some point. I'm happy to chat to you about it, or you can have a look at some of the papers that have come out of this work. But so I tracked 9 individuals with all of those GPS points. I overlaid it onto some environmental layers and did habitat suitability modelling to investigate how much of the island is suitable. And the estimate was just that 34% of the island is suitable, which is the areas in black in this map here. And we're really confident in this estimate as well, because these areas that are really, that are just grey with no suitable habitat coming out in the model, we never heard any owls or saw any owls in those areas either. So we're quite confident with the model. And further analysis looking at carrying capacity, taking into account territory size and what proportion of the territory was suitable habitat. The estimate for the carrying capacity of the island at the moment is just 75 owls, which you'll notice is more than the current population size. So habitat's not the most limiting factor for the owls, but 75 owls is still not very many. So habitat restoration is definitely still something that should be on the cards for Norfolk Island. And as far as how land managers could do that, these are some of the variables that we used. These are the variables that we used in the habitat suitability modelling. And this table shows you which of those variables were the most important. So elevation is important, but there's not a lot we can really do about that from a management perspective. But patch area, canopy height, and vegetation type are things we definitely can do something about. So the owls cared about patch area and they cared about canopy height. They liked larger patches and they liked taller trees, but they didn't really care about vegetation type. So there's a lot of invasive cherry guava on Norfolk Island. It's across the island. It's also quite quite a lot of it within the national park as well. So land managers are often trying to remove cherry guava as well as revegetate. But our results here kind of indicate that the owls don't really care about vegetation class, and I saw that on the island as well, that they would be roosting in the guava, roosting in tea tree, and they'd presumably be using it for foraging as well. Perhaps they're perching on the top and hunting flying insects above it. So the implications of all of that are that revegetation to increase patch size is more important than clearing woody weeds from a management perspective if we want to improve habitat for moreporks on Norfolk Island, which is something we should be doing because currently the island is not as suitable as it could be. On to the diet of the owls, which was another thing we looked at. This figure shows you the invertebrate consumption for 5 of the owls with their names there that we collected pellets and scats for. And we used eDNA analysis to look at what they were eating. And so these are the results from the eDNA analysis. You can see all of the sort of green coloured bars are Lepidoptera, so moths. And so the axes are the number of samples that have each of these different invertebrate types for each of the owls. So they're eating a lot of Lepidoptera. One bird in particular was eating flies and mosquitoes. She also ate some land snails, which was interesting. And a lot of the birds were eating spiders as well. And this is pretty standard for booboks and moreporks in Australia and New Zealand. I should also just caveat that this is just the eDNA results. We also had microscope analysis of pellets as well, which identified a lot more Coleoptera, which is your beetles. And so we identified that the different methods have different results in terms of prey identification, which is another side note of looking at the diet of raptors, something to think about. The vertebrates is where it's quite interesting though, and most important from a management perspective. So the owls are eating some of the native songbirds. They're also eating some of the non-native birds like your chickens and starlings. But every owl ate rodents. One of them only ate house mouse, but the others were eating rats. We're not sure whether that was black rats or Polynesian rats, but rats nonetheless. And the reason why that's important is because people use rat bait outside of the national park, which is certainly something we need to be thinking about, making sure they're not using rat bait that could cause secondary poisoning for the owls. But puts land managers in a really tricky position because the current baiting program on Norfolk Island is essential for Norfolk's threatened passerines, which a recent study showed just how bad rodents are for nesting survival of threatened songbirds on Norfolk Island, highlighting that the current baiting program, which is already as morepork safe as it can be, that baiting program is really important. So we can't really make too many changes to it from the morepork's perspective because we risk the impact that might have on the songbirds. So the main takeaway of that is just that moreporks make rodent management really complicated. Land managers now know about morepork consumption of rodents, which they already did, but it's a little bit more than we originally expected because, as you can see from this photo, rats are fairly large compared to these little moreporks, but they're eating them. And globally, what this means is that we just simply need better methods for controlling rodents that are non-target safe as well. So I also looked at how we can monitor these moreporks. We trialed 3 different monitoring programs. One of them was an active call broadcast survey protocol with experts. Then there was also 2 passive approaches, one with citizen scientists who were stationed out at 20 sites across the island all at the same time, listening for an hour, and passive acoustic recorders that were recording for 3 hours every night. And this map shows you all the different distributions for all the sites where we had these monitoring programs. And what we found was that call playback or call broadcast was definitely the most effective method. So we heard a lot more owls per survey in the call broadcast surveys, and the coefficient of variance, or the variance around the mean, was much lower. So it was really precise, and it was hearing more owls. So it worked much better than the other approaches. And we also did power analysis on the surveys, and found that the call playback approach was capable of detecting an annual change of 3 owls, which means if the population increased by 3 or decreased by 3 each year, we'd be able to detect it with that program. Whereas the other programs would only be able to detect a change of 11 or 12 owls, which is almost half the population. So we need more precision and reliability than that. But we're pretty confident that the reason why the call broadcast surveys worked was primarily because of the broadcast, and not so much because it was experts instead of citizen scientists doing it. I've got some more results in this paper that kind of highlight why we think that. But what we have decided to do is combine the call broadcast surveys with the citizen science surveys. So now we've got volunteers running these call broadcast surveys across the island. And that's the program that's being implemented on Norfolk Island now to check whether any management interventions are working and we see a population increase, or whether the population is continuing to decline due to lack of breeding. So now we're capable of detecting that, which is good. And finally, the last thing we did with the Norfolk Moreporks is the genetic analysis. So we collected or obtained 158 molecular samples from moreporks and boogbooks across Australia, New Zealand and Norfolk Island. This is a combination of museum and live caught specimens. And we were lucky enough to get our hands on 6 pre-hybridization Norfolk Island samples. So Roy Bell is a pretty famous collector. He went to Norfolk Island in 1912 and shot about 30 Norfolk Island moreporks. Those ended up in museums, and some of them are being held in the American Museum of Natural History. So we got to sample some of those and include those in our analysis, which was great. And this is a PCA, or principal coordinate analysis, which is essentially just plotting the relatedness of the different samples that were included in this analysis. And the x-axis explains 16% of the variation that we see, and the y-axis explains 7%. So paying more attention to this x-axis, there's a split between the New Zealand and the Norfolk Island samples and the rest of the samples, and Norfolk Island is clustered in with New Zealand. So Norfolk Island is more closely related to the New Zealand samples, and this is including the pre-hybridization samples and the post-hybridization samples, which obviously are going to cluster with New Zealand because they are half New Zealand anyway. This is another PCA with higher quality data. So the historical Norfolk Island samples, the pre-hybrid samples, are not included because they were quite low quality data. But it shows a similar pattern, and it's just highlighting to us that there's no indication of any recent gene flow onto Norfolk Island, which was a possibility as well, because some of you may know that a Tasmanian morepork ended up on Lord Howe Island back in 2019. So these birds do move around pretty, not commonly, but it happens. And so, yeah, we're pretty confident that that hasn't happened on Norfolk Island recently. So the implications of that are that New Zealand moreporks would be the most suitable donor population onto Norfolk Island if a genetic rescue was to happen again on Norfolk Island, which, in my opinion, it probably should. So to sum up, on the Norfolk Island morepork, they're doing okay. They're not doing great, but we think we know now what we need to know. Land managers have got the tools and the information, and we understand a lot more about the ecology of this species. So hopefully the future will be bright for the Norfolk Island morepork. Now we can move on to Christmas Island, and hopefully do a similar thing there. So like I said, we're right at the beginning of this project, but it's very similar to the Norfolk project in that there's a lot we don't know about the Christmas Island goshawk and the hawk owl, and hopefully we can find out some information to help inform conservation management. So Christmas Island, also known as Crabland by me. If you haven't heard of Christmas Island, you might know about the island that's got lots of crabs on it. You probably have if you've come to this seminar, but certainly look up the documentary with David Attenborough on the red crab migration on Christmas Island if you haven't already seen it. This is Christmas Island. This is where it is. It's in the Indian Ocean now, so we're crossing to the other side of Australia. Again, pretty isolated, not quite as isolated as Norfolk Island, and certainly, yeah, much closer to Indonesia than it is to Australia. A little bit of background on Christmas Island. It was first visited, I believe, in 1887, and they wrote that it was covered with trees and travelling over the sides was most difficult, and that the land crabs were a nuisance, which I thought was a fun little thing for them to add in there. But they pretty quickly discovered that the island had a lot of phosphate, which would be a really great thing for them to mine and earn lots of money. So 25% of the island was cleared pretty quickly to make way for these phosphate mines, which are still active on the island today. Some of them have been given back to the national park to be rehabilitated, but yeah, a lot of mines are still active on the island, so there's been some substantial habitat loss. Oh, and I was going to point out as well that this is an outline of Christmas Island. Some people think it looks a little bit like a dog, and so they've described this part here as the dog's head. And so this part of the island that we're seeing here is the dog's head, and this is the settlement sort of area up here and coming around here. This is where the people live. And then pretty much the rest of the island is either national park or mining area. So this project that we're working on is it's a National Environment Science Program, or a NEST project. It's called Ecology and Conservation of the Christmas Island Goshawk and Hawk Owl. There's a big team working on it. Mark Holdsworth is here. Nick Murray, very important collaborators, Justin Welberg, Ron Clark, Nick McGregor, and Jeff Williams. That's just the core members of the team. We've also got a couple of PhD students coming on to it. And Brendan and Alexia from Christmas Island. There's a lot of us working on it, which is really exciting. And you'll see here the aims: investigate distributions, abundances, demographics, individual health, spatial ecology, diet, and genetics, establish a robust monitoring program, and determine how urgently conservation actions may be required. There's a lot we're trying to get done in the next 2.5 years, which is why it's great that we've got such a good and big team to do it. So a little bit of background on what we know about the Christmas Island goshawk, Tachyspiza fasciatus natalis. It depends who you ask. They're either recognised as a subspecies of the brown goshawk or the variable goshawk. We're not entirely sure. So part of this study will be trying to determine that, and also determine whether maybe it shouldn't be a subspecies. Perhaps it should be a full species. They're found only on Christmas Island. They're classified as endangered and expected to be probably stable, but not 100% sure. The population estimate at the moment is just 250 individuals, but they are found all across the island in lots of different habitat types. We actually know a bit about what they eat. This comes from stomach contents analysis and pellets analysis. Some of it is just sort of anecdotal and observational, but we know that they're eating rodents, songbirds, emerald doves, feral chickens, lizards, geckos, large grasshoppers, giant centipedes, a few other things, but sort of the kind of larger animal prey that they can get access to on Christmas Island. But it'll be really great to understand a little bit more about specifics within this. How often are they eating each of these prey types, and Is it determined by prey availability, and does it differ depending on where the bird lives? So there's some questions about diet that we definitely want to understand. In terms of their breeding, this is a new thing for me because the Norfolk Island Moreporks didn't breed. I didn't really have much work to do in that space. But in terms of breeding of the goshawks, there have been very few nests that have been observed. Mark can correct me if I'm wrong after this, but from what's published, there seems to only be 6 nests that are sort of officially reported, including one that has literally just fledged about a week ago, which is quite exciting. And this is one of the chicks from that nest. The breeding season is reported to be between October to February, but like I said, just had some fledging a week ago, so perhaps that needs to be extended to April, and we'll try and refine our understanding about breeding phenology throughout this project. We know that nests are made out of twigs and creepers, and they're generally placed near the top of very tall trees. Usually it's 1 to 2 chicks. We're not 100% sure about success rate, but there's an expectation that it might be low because some of the nests that have been reported have only had 1 chick fledge in them. Some possible threats among others to come. Habitat loss, obviously from the mining, and secondary poisoning potentially if they're eating a lot of rodents, especially if they're hanging out in the settlement areas, which we know they are, and we know that people on Christmas Island have access to all kinds of bait. So secondary poisoning certainly could be a risk for the goshawks. Collisions with vehicles, we're not sure how common that is, but there certainly are roadkill specimens that have fallen to that. And even in just the 5 weeks that I've spent there, I've seen a couple of birds with injured eyes, which could be a result of a collision due to having brain injuries. Yellow crazy ants, I'm not going to go into the specifics about yellow crazy ants. If you haven't heard about them, you could Google that as well, because that's pretty, Christmas Island is like the textbook example of this invasive species that has just formed these super colonies, and they spit acid on the crabs, and then the death of crabs impacts the vegetation structure, and you end up with a forest that looks completely different to what it did before these ants got here. So complete change in the ecosystem because of these ants. Doesn't seem like they've had an impact on the goshawks so far, so probably not, but perhaps the secondary impacts on habitat alteration. And inbreeding depression. If it's true that there's only 250 individuals, is inbreeding depression something we should be thinking about? And I'm sure there's probably other threats as well. But to try and understand all of those questions that I had before about the aims, something that's quite important is catching the goshawks. And thanks to Mark, we have a really amazing, laughably amazing way of catching the goshawks. It's a peg pole or an extendable pole with a 3D printed peg on the end that can be manipulated from the base of the pole. Before we get the pole out, we drive around in a truck sitting in the back of the ute with a teddy bear arm and a cable tie wrapped around it to make it look like a rat. That dangles out the back of the ute on fishing line, looking like a rat jumping around. The goshawks fly at the lure. They perch in a tree nearby. We get out this pole, extend it up, and then the peg just goes around the bird's leg, and the talons stop it from getting out. And then you've just got a goshawk on the end of the pole, and it's incredible. And they let you do it, and I've never seen or heard of anything like it, and it works amazingly, and it's really great. And so catching goshawks is really easy, and we're going to be, well, I'm making it sound maybe easier than it is, but yeah, we're going to be, I'm very comfortable and confident that we're going to be able to catch enough goshawks with this method to do what we need to do. And so once we do catch the goshawks, we can take blood samples, we can put bands on them, we can take measurements, and we can put these GPS trackers on them and work out where they've been going and do all the same similar things that I did with the Norfolk Island Morepork. And we've put 5 trackers out so far, and these are the GPS points for each of those birds. So each colour is a different bird. Starting with the one at the bottom here down in South Point, this is an adult female. And South Point is not the greatest habitat, we don't expect. It's quite very open, it's been cleared, it is and was used for mining, but some of the mining's just sort of been left, and now it's this kind of weedy area. So she's got a really large territory occupying a lot of that space. Up here in the Dog's Head is a juvenile male, and you can see he's also travelled quite far. He's been hanging out in this kind of more urban area, and then also comes in and explores the plateau area, which is quite high quality habitat as well. And then, yeah, comparatively, these two, the yellow and the purple, yellow is an adult male, and purple's an adult female. They've got much smaller territory size, and they're occupying habitat that would probably be considered high quality. It's remnant forest, largely undisturbed, unmodified. If we zoom in a little bit closer into some of the tracks, this is the GPS points for the juvenile male that's up in the Dog's Head. Early results, just observationally, we can see that it's using a lot of edge habitat. So it's occupying these sort of small patches of trees, or these sort of edges of the forest, presumably using these open spaces for foraging, probably large grasshoppers and other things that they sort of scamper across this open space. It might be kind of an easy feeding opportunity for this juvenile. And then as we come closer into these 2 adults that were within the national park, that juvenile, it's come into this habitat, and even when it's in this higher quality habitat, it looks like it's still sticking to this this 4-wheel drive track that goes through the national park. So already some interesting results that we can see about goshawk movement so far. This male was occupying a nest with a female. We didn't see any evidence of chicks or eggs, but they were certainly using the nest. And this male was really showing this kind of central place foraging strategy of it spends time at the nest, and then it goes out, and then it comes back in, and then it goes out, back in and out. And so that's sort of why we're seeing this pattern here. Comparatively, this adult female spends most of her time around the outside of her territory, which is quite interesting. And she moved really slowly around it as well. She sort of like spent a day up here, and then a day over here, and then a day over here. So she sort of just like did the territory day by day, which could be due to a number of things. Perhaps, yeah, she's defending her territory in preparation for breeding or looking for a mate, or lots of possibilities, looking forward to catching more birds and finding out. That's all we've got from the goshawks for now. Watch the space, more to come hopefully. Let's move on to the Christmas Island hawk owl now, Ninox natalis. It gets to be its own species. It's not a subspecies. It's classified as threatened, expected, or it is stable. We're pretty confident on that. A recent publication last year that was based off of some long-term point count surveys identified that the population is probably stable. They're only found on Norfolk Island. There's expected to be 560, give or take 100 breeding pairs, which is quite a lot, certainly compared to the Norfolk Island Morepork, and even compared to the goshawk, which to me, early days, but just early observations on the island is kind of surprising. So we'll be trying to see if that's correct. They're also found all across the island and can be heard even from settlement areas. There have been 4 recorded nests, all located within hollows, but just 4, not many. And they're currently believed to breed all year round, and that's based off of hearing chicks trilling and other sort of breeding behaviour observations. I'm hoping that that's wrong. and actually they breed in April, or they start to breed in April and May, which is why I'm heading out there in a few weeks, and hoping to catch a bunch of horse cows using call broadcast. And if I'm correct that they start breeding in April or May, then they'll be really mad about my call broadcast, and they'll come over really quickly, and they'll be much easier to catch, because so far they've been a little bit challenging. The methods that we've used are mist nets and call broadcast, which is what I did on Norfolk Island. But the first night that we tried it, we caught one and we were like, great, this is going to be easy. And then we decided to catch a few more and we couldn't. And so actually it hasn't been as easy as we'd hoped. They either just don't respond to the call broadcast, they don't come over, or they fly above the nets because the canopy is so high. So that, yeah, if I'm correct about breeding, it'll all be okay, but so far it's been a bit challenging. The other method is we can use these decoys. So this is a 3D printed horse cow that Rowan's son 3D printed for us. I then put this coloured plasticine on it to make it look a little bit more real, and stuck some roadkill chook feathers to it, and it worked really, really well. We used call broadcast, we put this decoy on this fence, and a horse cow came and perched right next to it, and then with a hand net I was able to grab the horse cow. So these are our two methods, and hopefully we'll be able to catch a few that way over the course of the project. But like I said, catching has been a bit difficult so far, so fingers crossed for the future. But this is what they look like in the hand when we do catch them. Such a beautiful little bird, as you can see, extremely cute. But we've conducted some passive and some call broadcast surveys in the meantime to try and compare the effectiveness of call broadcast in different habitat types and relative to passive surveys, which is something I didn't do on Norfolk. I didn't directly compare passive versus active. So that's the plan here, to do that on Christmas Island. And what that involves is 10 minutes of passive listening and then 10 minutes of an active survey, which is listening for 2 minutes, then playback for 2 minutes, listening for another 2 minutes, then playback, and then listening for another 2 minutes. And so far, call broadcast does increase the number of owls heard per night. This is very preliminary results, but the grey bars are the call broadcast surveys and the black bars are the passive surveys. And we're looking at the mean number of owls heard per night in the different habitat structures. So consistently more owls heard per night with the broadcast surveys. The habitat structures, how I've grouped them is dense understory and dense canopy, dense understory and open canopy, open understory, dense canopy, and open understory, open canopy. And so fairly consistent results across the habitat structure. But where they differ, which was quite interesting, so if we want to look at precision, coefficient of variance is a good indicator of that. A smaller coefficient of variance, or COV, indicates greater precision. So when we compare COV of broadcast and passive surveys, broadcast is consistently lower, so more precise than passive surveys. But then when we calculate the delta COV, or the difference in the COV, we get a much larger number for open understory, open canopy, which means the impact of call broadcast is much stronger in the open areas. So it's much more precise, or a greater improvement to a precision in the open sites, and quite a lot more. So the sort of implication of that is that could impact monitoring if you've got a method that is not consistent across your different sites. I'm not 100% sure how serious of an impact that would be. It's something that we'll look into, but the point of this is to understand whether call broadcast is the best approach for monitoring the horse owls. But more to come on that. And finally, We want to engage the community as part of this project as well, making sure we're understanding what their perspectives about the project are. Are they supportive of what we're doing? What is their understanding about interactions between humans and raptors on Christmas Island? We know that people have chickens that get attacked by goshawks, and people don't like that generally. So we want to understand how much do people not like that. Of course, if secondary poisoning is a potential threat, we need to make sure we're chatting to the community and understanding, do they even care about the raptors? If we ask them to stop using baits, will they? Because if they don't care about raptors, then why would they? So we want to understand what kind of importance the raptors have to the community as well. And that's everything that I've got. Thanks everyone for listening, and a big thank you to everyone who's been involved in all of these projects. I'm not going to write all their names because there's simply too many to list. But yes, big thank you. And if anyone has any questions, please let me know.
Well, thank you very much, Flossy. I wasn't expecting most of that. Now you've taken it on. I'm impressed, really. I like all those catching methods. It looks like Norfolk Island is not so good for catching birds, but your Christmas Island birds are much easier to catch and work with. Yeah.
Hopefully the hawk owls will be. So far, not so much, but we'll see.
Oh, well, it looks promising. I'm sure you can fine tune. That's the good thing about it. You're actually fine tuning as you go along. So it's great to be able to adapt and progress. Yeah. There are some questions coming in. I'll just sneak a couple of my own first. First of all, just the notes I had. I'm glad to hear the New Zealand race was the best choice for boosting the Norfolk Island. That was great news, because people were really in the dark, really. They weren't. Genetics has come on so far since then. It's so well done. The whole team was involved in that over the years.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Rats are a problem in islands, of course, but it makes it really more difficult when your rats are making a mess of the other species that you want to conserve on the islands, but at the same time you want the rats for your owls. And I do wonder, why do not all the pairs of moreporks breed every year? And why do they not all breed? And they don't breed every year. What's happening? Do they need the large mammalian or avian food to breed successfully?
It's possible, but I do think that they're very generalist feeders.
Yeah.
And we know that they're happy eating a lot of the songbirds, even the endangered ones, unfortunately, and that there is an abundance of rodents across the island. Even there's another nest project happening right now on Norfolk Island on the rats, monitoring them and understanding as much as they can about how to control them. And results are showing that the rats are still prolific in the national park, and they're sort of like popping up in one area, and there'll be really dense numbers of them. Ali from Norfolk Island was telling me just the other day that they'll set up cage traps of rats, and they're just getting full of rats. Almost, she described it as almost plague numbers. So there's still a lot of mammals in the national park, unfortunately, as well as other songbirds for them to grab, and there's feral chickens running around the national park. So it's entirely possible that they're not able to breed because of food, because I didn't specifically look at that, but it does seem like there's a lot around for them based off of things we know that they do eat. I think it seems based on what we've seen about the gradual decline in breeding success that it's probably an inbreeding depression situation where perhaps they're laying eggs, but the eggs are never hatching, or they're copulating, but they're never laying an egg because of the impacts of inbreeding depression. But don't know, didn't test it. Just what I think might be happening.
Yeah. Okay. So it's definitely not. I was just wondering if the rats population had gone down, because obviously it hasn't. And yeah, I hope it isn't inbreeding, but something will have to be done, I think. Yeah, it looks a bit more hands-on than the other species you got on Christmas Island. They seem to be coping quite well, and they're occupying all the habitats. Well, yeah. I'm just looking at some of these other questions. I've only got one from Nalini Scarf. She works in wildlife rescue, including raptors, and she's intrigued by your goshawk catching method. And I'm sure she's intrigued by the owl catching method as well. And she wonders if it should be used to capture injured raptors. Because she works in rehab, so you can often get close to a bird but not quite catch it. Yeah.
Chat to Mark about it. He also has a lot of experience with injured raptors as well, so he's your guy.
Yeah, potentially. I'll step in there. Yeah, that technique certainly could be used for smaller birds like goshawk size or smaller that are approachable. This is the key with the Christmas Island goshawk. It's unusually approachable. A brown goshawk on the mainland you'd never get within a bull's roar of it. So, yeah, clearly a severely injured or compromised bird of prey could be caught with that method. Certainly would be worth a try. But in those situations, just a hand net on a pole probably would be sufficient anyway. But yeah, it's worth a try, and I'm happy to share that technique with others. While I'm speaking, I just want to note that you might have noted there's some banded birds in some of those photographs, the goshawks. So the Australian Raptor Association, now the Raptor Group, commenced the banding project back in 2004. So I was involved with that, and Nick Mooney, Victor Hurley. Victor was leading the project then, and we've had Commonwealth funding to do that, to establish a banded population, and I've continued that on since then. So it's over 20 years of banding at a sort of a background level. And we've banded about 400 individuals over the years, and we've got a database now of about 1,100 sightings of banded and unbanded birds, which will kick this project off really nicely. We've already got some really useful information about longevity. One female is at least 18 years old, so some pretty powerful stuff, and it just goes to show the value of long-term banding projects. You wouldn't otherwise get that information. But it sets a nice foundation for Flossy and the PhD student to start to look at some of the demographics and important biological features of the species.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. That's right.
I'll support that. You certainly can't do any better than long-term projects with individually marked birds. It makes a huge difference. It really does. Yeah. Don't have any questions. No questions coming in. Anybody else got questions out there? Fire away, just putting down the chat line. Talking about the sample size, what he said, only 6 nests have been watched in the goshawks, and only 4 nests of the owls been found. Is that your project or ever?
This is published data. So
seems tiny.
There's probably anecdotally from Mark and others within the national park that could add to that. But in terms of published reports of nests, that's all that I have found so far.
Yeah, it is about 6. Yeah, that's about correct for the goshawk. I haven't found any hawk owl nests at all. Others have bumped into what may be nests, but there hasn't been any effort since Richard Hill's earlier studies to really track down this. So that's a big question for the PhD students and Flossy to track down some owl nests. There's a big gap of knowledge there. And the goshawk, we've had some information, but we need to have more work. So it's a matter of effort, really.
All right. Another question from Nalini. Are there no native mammals on Christmas Island?
There were 2 native rodents that went extinct,
Right.
and there was also a pipistrelle or a microbat that went extinct very recently, actually. Presumably both raptors have been eating those, so that's an interesting interaction for us to think about as well, from the perspective of, well, have black rats, even though they're invasive, have they filled that niche that the other rodents were playing, and perhaps, an important prey source for the raptors that they might have had historically, will be something interesting to consider as well.
There was also a tree shrew as well. That was, I think the last one confirmed was back in the 70s, perhaps. But it still may be there, but unlikely, but it could be there.
Mm-hmm.
How do your birds fare in relation to some of the other worldwide island endemic raptors? That's an easy one.
I mean, I bet there's someone on the line who knows better than I do the answer to that.
I was just thinking about sort of Mauritius, Seychelles, Kestrels, that sort of thing, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as an island top predator, they all suffer the threat of being a small population. And I think it is a very interesting idea, this sort of, the idea, I'm curious about the idea of threatened island top predators, because they naturally must have always existed in small numbers. And so from a genetic rescue and from an inbreeding perspective, I think it's very interesting to consider that, sure, they might technically be endangered or threatened or critically endangered because there's such a small population, but perhaps they've always been that way and they're stable, and actually they don't need any conservation interventions. It's just the way that population has always been on a small island. But of course, with habitat loss, it's just, an already vulnerable small size just gets exacerbated so quickly when you reduce the habitat availability. So I think I can't answer your question specifically in terms of any other island raptors, but I think generally it's a problem that all island top predators would be facing is small population size with the combination of additional threats on an already small size.
Yeah, but it's sort of, you go back to Norfolk Island again. Okay,
Is that my internet or Stuart's internet?
Yeah.
I didn't catch any of that, Stuart. I'm not sure if others did.
Sorry. I was just wondering, there's such a big difference between your moreporks and Norfolk Island compared to the other 2 species in Christmas Island. It can't just be the size of the island, because they seem to be thriving in that not much a bigger island in Christmas Island. It's bigger, but it's not enormous. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right, actually, and I think that probably is kind of supports what I'm saying, that about the idea that when it's already small, so Norfolk Island is about 3 times smaller than Christmas Island, 3 or 4 times.
Yeah.
So it's already a bit smaller, but perhaps that was okay if it was fully forested. But then on top of that, only about 25% of the island is national park. The rest of the island is very fragmented habitat. So you take an island, you take Norfolk Island versus Christmas Island, as they are fully, or as they were fully forested, they're okay. But then you remove 75% of the habitat for Norfolk and 25% of the habitat for Christmas, and that's enough to make the difference between a population that can continue to do well and a population that just declines to extinction eventually.
Yeah. So you're finding that sort of dripping point where things are just going to collapse. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, eventually, like with in theory, with breeding depression, that is what the trajectory should be. But I still think it's an interesting idea. Island top predators having, some resilience to it. Who knows? All speculation from my side here.
It's a pity because you haven't got much to work on in Norfolk Island. But in Christmas Island, I think that you're talking about the population. You've got the population, a sample of the population well marked and followed on a long-term study. The next thing you need to do really is breeding success, just to complete the whole population dynamics. Yeah. But it's very difficult for that in Norfolk Island because you haven't got enough to play with. Yeah,
exactly. And they're just I just couldn't find any. I found pairs, and I found them doing courtship with each other, and one of them was using a nest box, but they just didn't. They never progressed further than sort of courtship behaviours. Okay. It looks like Lisa has some questions in the chat. Do the raptors have any native predators on either island? I don't think so. Certainly not the Norfolk Island Moreporks. I doubt the Christmas Island hawk owls do either, just because they're nocturnal, but they are a lot smaller than a female goshawk, so maybe, but I don't. It definitely doesn't seem to be common. They don't have any common predators. And then another question: any plastic found in their pellet samples? No. It's an interesting question. Not that I saw on Norfolk. Be interesting to check. Probably more for the goshawks. I feel like if plastic was going to be ending up in their pellets, it would be through the stomach contents of their prey rather than them just ingesting a piece of plastic. And so then I would expect it to be more likely to be in a goshawk from eating a sort of larger prey that's more likely to have eaten a little bit of plastic. But yeah, interesting question.
So I never saw those questions. They're not coming up on my screen. Yeah. You've got another related one from Matthew. Do you have the plans and how you look at the Christmas Island boobox owl diet? Yeah. And you just more or less answer that. You're looking at it, but yeah.
What was that question? I can't see that question.
Yeah, you get a different set of questions. Yeah. Do you have plans for how you will look at the Christmas Island boobox diet?
Yes. Similar to the Norfolk Island. So once we put trackers on them, which we have to catch them first, but if we can do that and we can put trackers on them, we will then be able to find where they're roosting, which, if anyone doesn't know, is where they sleep during the day. And the Norfolk Island Moreporks are very loyal to their roosts. So they have a few particular roosts that they continuously return to. And anecdotal reports from Christmas Island hawk owls is that they do the same. Someone will see a hawk owl roosting in a tree in their backyard, and it'll do so for a week, and then they won't see it again. But hopefully, they will keep returning to the same roost. So then we can set up sheets underneath the roost to collect the pellets and the scats that they eject while they're roosting. The sheets will have to be high off the ground so that the crabs don't get them, because that's sort of that's going to be the biggest challenge. We're unlikely to find any pellets or scats on the ground because the crabs will eat anything and everything. So we'll have to find the roof, set up the sheets underneath, keep them off the ground, and hopefully that works. Or nest box. There aren't any nest boxes, but hollow contents, or if we find out that we can't find any hollows, maybe we'd put up nest boxes. Probably not, but hollow contents could be another way of looking at what they're eating.
Okay. You got any more questions coming up on your screen? Mark has just answered a couple here. I can see.
These are other ones, I guess.
I can't see any others.
No, I can only see the ones from Lisa.
Oh, in that case, well done. We'll just close the meeting. I think it was a very good talk. I learned a lot. Thank you very much. And it's great to see it's a big project. It must be huge.
Yep.
It's not an easy place to do a big project if you're all traveling across Australia before you even fly from Perth to Christmas Island. Yeah. Logistics. Oh.
It's like an international flight, and I don't want to forget anything, that's for sure.
No, you can't just nip back. Yeah.
Yeah, and the postal service is not that quick.
Right, okay. Right. Okay, well, thank you very much. It was good. I think it was a very successful meeting. So we'll just wrap up now. Thanks everybody for coming along, supporting it, and let's have some more meetings of the same quality. Right. Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks, Stuart.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Flossy.
Thanks, Mark.